Okay, hello everybody. So it's 5:30, so I think we just go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us for this session of the Georgia TESOL Professional Learning Series. My name is Brian Hibbs. I'm a member at large of the Georgia TESOL Board. So I thank you very much for joining us today. So the session that we were today's session, the title of the session is The Heart of Learning, Teaching the Language of Self-Advocacy. And so I'm really kind of excited about this session because thinking about, especially, the concept of language and thinking about that oftentimes, especially for me, that being, because I'm an associate professor of education at Dalton State, that often thinking about, when I think of language, I think about it much more in a scientific sort of way, being the self-admitted applied linguist nerd that I am, but thinking about, taking the language and looking at it sort of in different ways, I think is really kind of interesting. And so using sort of like the heart and advocacy, I'm really excited to think about sort of using language in kind of a new way. So I'm really excited for today's session, as I'm sure you all are. Just to kind of give you a bit of a heads up of the professional learning series. So some of you may have attended the different parts of the professional learning series that we've had in the past. So typically what we have is usually about twice a month, oftentimes every other Thursday, we have a session on different things related to English, to the ESOL world, but usually this talks happen about twice a month. And some sessions, they are for members only unless they're labeled as public. One thing we started actually a couple of months ago is if you're registered for the session and you attend, that you get a certificate of participation, which is always kind of fun, but is also, if you need documentation for your school, your district, or something like that. And then we have, which we're sort of in the final planning stages, but we're having a mid-year Georgia TESOL social that's entitled May the 4th Be With You, to sort of celebrate the 4th. Details will be forthcoming, but what we're planning kind of at this point is to kind of have several sites set up around the state where people can come and sort of get to know TESOL and celebrate TESOL and those kind of things. So we will send you more information as that becomes available, and then we'll take a break in July. Also during the summer, we'll have several sessions that focus on several of the sessions throughout the year will focus on a student, parent, and community empowerment. And those sessions really have been spread out throughout the year. But also in the month of June, we'll have a series of sessions focused on content and language integration for multilingual learners. And so we'll have several of those sessions in June. So I will stop sharing. And so I'll briefly, so if you want to load, if one of you, if you want to start, I think you should be able to share your screen. So as you do that, I'll go ahead and introduce our three speakers. So Ms. Emily Day is a teacher for Gadsden City Schools in Alabama. She has worked in Alabama public schools for 23 years and holds degrees in special education, rehabilitation counseling, and TESOL. Emily serves as transition coordinator for Gadsden City Schools, where she instructs students on job readiness skills, including self-advocacy. This past summer, she worked at a refugee camp with families from Afghanistan. When not in the classroom or traveling, she enjoys reading, kayaking, running, and backpacking. Hopefully not at the same time. Might get a bit tricky.
If I can fit all of them in one trip, I will.
Good. Our second speaker, Dr. Lori Edmonds, is an assistant professor of English learner education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Her responsibilities include teaching courses on curriculum programs and policies, methods and materials for teaching ESL, and effective teaching and learning. She holds an undergraduate degree in modern languages and linguistics, a master's degree in instructional systems development / English for speakers of other languages, and a PhD in language literacy and culture from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Her research focuses on funds of knowledge and biographical narratives in culturally diverse class students. And our final speaker, Dr. Josephine Prado, is also an assistant professor of English learner education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Her responsibilities include teaching various courses in the Master of Arts in Education program for teaching English as a second language, coordinating the community English program, and implementing grants. Dr. Prado holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in German language and literature from Agnes Scott College, a Master of Arts in teaching English to speakers of other languages from the University of Alabama, and a PhD in secondary curriculum and instruction with a focus in educational linguistics from the University of Alabama. Her research interests include language use, identity, and the relationship between school and community. So without further ado, I'll let you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone. We are delighted to be here. Truly honored, truly honored. So after that amazing introduction, I will simply jump into how this webinar came to be. I wanted to share with you that a few years ago, Emily was an EDS student of mine at UAB. And she first presented this idea at our state conference, the Alabama Mississippi TESOL conference in January of 2020. But then COVID hit and things all went awry. Somehow during that time, though, she was taking a class for us, and for the class, she published a very small practitioner article about this idea, because she had gotten such a great and warm reception at MTSOL. We all knew that we needed to think more deeply about this topic of self-advocacy. And then in spring of 2022, Lori Edmonds joined us at UAB, and we all decided to expand and retool Emily's original idea so we could submit it to the Georgia TESOL Journal. And then we were able to present our idea at the conference in Atlanta, and here we are today. So thank you very much for inviting us. We're so excited. And some of the lessons learned, for me at least, is that, for anyone out there who is developing their research agenda, just, developing ideas takes time, and it's really not a linear process. It's a lot messier than the final paper would make it look like. And the other thing, which I think is so important, because diversity for me is a real passion, is that when we collaborate with other fields and we get other perspectives and diverse ways of thinking, and we all learn. And this is absolutely an example of that. So with that in mind, let's find out what we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. Great. So our agenda today is we're going to start out by defining self-advocacy from several different perspectives. And then we're going to discuss why self-advocacy matters for ESOL students, and perhaps what some of the challenges might be and how we can address those challenges. Then we'll jump into describing the teaching of self-advocacy in ESOL, right? Specifically in a classroom. And this is really where Emily shines, because this was her original idea. Finally, then we'll have an opportunity to all of us explore a self-advocacy scenario so that we can hopefully implement some of the ideas that we're talking about today. And then hopefully we'll have time to share takeaways. So next slide.
Okay, so I guess the first thing we need to do is define self-advocacy. And so when I think of self-advocacy, it's not a new concept to the world of special education where I come from. And so from the time I was getting my bachelor's degree in the olden days, close to 25 years ago, self-advocacy was something that was talked about a lot in the world of special education. Next slide, please. So when we're in the world of special education, it's part of the pedagogy. It's something that special education teachers are expected to try all of their students to become. So it's in the curriculum, not just one curriculum, lots of curriculums. There are entire curriculums that focus on students becoming independent, and self-advocacy is part of that journey. Self-advocacy promotes students towards independence. And one way that we do that a lot in the world of special education is to work on them telling what they want, telling what they need, and then eventually leading their meetings, and that's their yearly meetings, similar to the ones that we have in the ESOL world, where they can address to an audience what their needs are. Okay, so to start with, I want to show this video. And while you're watching the video, it's going to, describe self-advocacy, but it's also going to show a student being a self-advocate and that process and some of the steps that a student would go to or go through. And be patient. It may have a commercial in the beginning.
Lori, we can't hear it.
Self-advocacy, learning to self-advocate. This is a skill that is important to your overall well-being. What does it mean to self-advocate? Self-advocating means to speak up for yourself, to ask for what you need, to ask questions, and for help. How do you already self-advocate? Examples of advocating for yourself includes asking your foster parents to eat something specific for dinner, asking your workplace for more hours, asking your teacher for more time with an assignment. Remember, we should always be respectful when asking. How can you gain more self-advocacy skills? Examples of gaining self-advocacy skills include to learn how to speak or stand up for yourself, to know what is important to you, to know how to respectfully ask for what you need, and to practice. There are 5 key steps a person can take to help them with self-advocating. In the next slides, we'll review these steps more in depth. Step 1, identify and clarify. In this step, you'll want to ask yourself, what is the issue? What do you need or want? Be clear and specific about the issue and what you'll need. If you know what the issue is, it will be easier to ask for help. Step 2, reach out. In this step, you'll want to reach out to someone you trust, someone you think might help. Remember, you can reach out to different people and consider creating a plan with a trusted person if you need to ask someone else to solve this issue. Step 3, have courage. In this step, you'll need to believe in yourself. You are worth it. Remember that it's not always easy to speak up, but you deserve to be heard. Take one step at a time, practice what you're going to say, and be prepared that you may not always get what you want. Step 4, speak up. In this step, you'll want to speak to the person who can help you solve the issue you have. Choose the right time and place for a meaningful conversation. Be specific when explaining to the person what you need and how to support you. Maintain respect during the conversation and afterwards. Step 5, reflect. In this step, you'll want to check in with yourself about what happened, how the conversation went, what did you learn, what could you do next, and are there any next steps for you to take? Now that we've walked through the 5 steps of self-advocacy, remember that it is okay to ask for help. It takes courage to ask for help. You may not always get what you want, and remember, you either win or you learn, but you never lose.
I think that is such a sweet video. And I know that the example in the video is a girl that wants to see her brother, but advocacy can take so many different places and so many different forms. I think the importance from the video is that we key in to the fact that our students can be a self-advocate, how important it can be for them to be able to express and ask for the things that they want, and also that there is a role for us to support them in doing that.
Super. So as we were, we wanted to explore self-advocacy within the TESOL world, and looking through the literature, we found lots and lots of articles about advocacy, but very little or maybe nothing about self-advocacy in TESOL and ESL. Now, within the ESL field, Diane Stehr-Fenner's definition of scaffolded advocacy most closely aligns with our understanding of self-advocacy. And so really what happens, or what we understand scaffolded advocacy to be, is that when teachers will learn all that they can about their new English learners and their families when they arrive to a new school. And with that understanding, the teacher then can provide intense levels of support or advocacy in the beginning, and then gradually reduce that advocacy as the child and family adjust to their new home and their new life. But the important difference, of course, is probably what you've already picked up on, is that with scaffolded advocacy, there's no explicit instruction, such as the steps taken in the video, as to how to self-advocate, right? It's simply a removal of support. So with that in mind, and next slide, please. We decided to look in disability studies. So disability studies is slightly different than special education. They're two different fields, although closely related. So within the field of disability study, within that literature, we look for guidance in connecting self-advocacy to instructional strategies, because this is what Emily had been doing, and we wanted to learn a little more about what the literature said. So we found that based on a meta-analysis done by Test and colleagues in 2005, they had found that the literature in disability studies consistently characterized self-advocacy as being these 4 things: an educational goal, a civil rights movement, part of self-determination, and a skill or an act. And so I think that in the video, for example, you can certainly see it set up as a series of skills. And those skills then could easily be put into, and we're going to talk about it in just a second, in an educational goal. Of course, it can be a civil rights movement, and it's definitely part of self-determination. But what happens is these larger concepts then Test and colleagues developed these concepts into a 4-point framework. And within this framework, they then were able to build or construct 4 instructional components. And that's on the next slide. So these instructional components are broad enough that teachers can build unit plans, they can design individual lesson plans, activities, or integrate learning objectives into lessons that they already have. So the 4 components, the knowledge of self, communication skills, knowledge of rights and leadership skills, all of these were addressed in that video in one way or another. The girl had to understand herself to know that she missed her brother and needed to see him, and then needed to develop the communication skills in order to ask the right questions in the right way. This is so important for our ESL students, both in terms of syntax and just building the right question, but also in terms of culture, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Okay. So and then finally, with knowledge of rights, the girl in the video needed to understand what was within her legal right to request. So Emily will talk to you a little bit in just a little while about her lessons, and you'll see these components again come up in her lessons. But first, let's explore why self-advocacy matters to our ESL students. So now we go to the next slide.
So we're going to just address for a minute, why is self-advocacy important? And I know as teachers, you have so many things already that's in your agenda that, why does this matter? And I can speak from my experience when students have been taught the lessons from self-advocacy, it flows into so many other things in the school building. Because once they have the courage to say, hey, Miss Day, I have this problem with this class, and I know that my plan says this. I need you to help me know how to speak to this teacher. And it just really becomes a big growth for them, a big process of maturing and taking on the things that they want, the things that they need, and communicating those with you. So I want you to know that that's why it's important, is because it's one of the major ways that not only can you work with your students on their communication skills, but also just on their personal growth as far as language learning and becoming, more independent. Next slide, please. Okay, so when I go to introduce self-advocacy, and I have to think about it from the student perspective, here's some of the questions I kind of ask as, I guess you could say, as the hook or as the buy-in. I'll ask them things like, well, who do you want to be in control of your life and your future? Like, who do you want to make decisions for you? Where you're going to work, where you're going to live, if they're in younger grades, what sports you're going to play, or who your friends are, like who do you want to make those decisions? And then I also try to get them to understand that once they make those decisions, then then it's theirs. So there's sort of a buy-in there that, oh, so now I've made this decision, and so it's mine. It's my goal to kind of carry through. Another thing that I want them to understand is that advocate is a noun. They are going to be an advocate. It's a thing, but it's also a verb. It's something that they can do. So we spend a lot of time talking about how they can be both, and how we just pronounce it a little bit different, and then when you put the self in front of it, that is them doing it, not me doing it for them, not their parents doing it for them, not an older brother or sister, but them having the skills to make decisions and speak up for what they would like. And of course we talk about why that's important, and I may give a simple example. Okay, you go into the ice cream parlor, there's 32 flavors, 31 flavors, Baskin Robbins. Do you want somebody else deciding your ice cream? And most of the time they'll say no. And we talk about all the different ice creams, they like in the room. Well, you sure you don't want me to choose for you? Because I love mint chocolate chip. And some of them go, ew, yuck, mint chocolate chip. I'm like, but that's my favorite. That's what I want you all to eat too. That's the kind I'm going to bring tomorrow. And so I try to get them to understand the point of being able to have the communication skills to speak up for what they want, and not always having somebody speak up for them. Okay. And then if you notice at the bottom that there is some, possible answers that I try to drive them to in that conversation. Next slide, please. Okay, so from the educator's perspective, why does self-advocacy matter? So Dr. Prado earlier was talking about Finner's research, and in the scaffolded advocacy, remember, it's just kind of understood that as the family or as the individual increases in their language or their acculturation, that it will kind of just naturally happen, right? That we'll just back out and it will naturally happen, that they'll become advocates for themselves. And for some individuals, that may be true. Okay, there are some people out there that once the language or the acculturation gets better, then, you know, they could be good. But from my experience, there's a lot of individuals that can't make this leap. So if you'll just study that picture for a minute and think about it. We're turning them loose. I mean, and there's still a bridge to cross. So, you know, we need to fill in that gap. We need to think about, hey, for some students, especially our marginalized population, we are going to need to give them the skills to make that leap from us doing it for them, because honestly, that's what our literature says. Teachers, be a self-advocate, and I want you to, especially for newcomers and families that, you know, need you to advocate. Absolutely advocate for them. But now they've been here a year or two or three, and now their language skills have improved and their acculturation to the community is there. Okay, so now your role is going to change, right? Your role should be, I'm going to back up a little, but I want to support you in becoming an advocate for yourself. Okay, so teacher role, and this is hard sometimes for us, because once we have it in our head that we are going to advocate for you, I want to keep doing it. I'm going to advocate, 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 and advocate. And then I know sometimes in the back of our minds, we're like, God, their English skills are pretty good now. Thought they'd be doing this. Try not to do that. But the reason you're thinking that is you're thinking, hey, I think that I've been advocating for them for 5 years now. I think that maybe possibly this parent or this child could start asking for some things for themselves. So that's the clue in that, hey, my role needs to change. I don't need to advocate for them always. Now I need to help them to get the skills to advocate for themselves. So you're shifting. You're no longer advocating for, you're now coaching or facilitating them to advocate for themselves. So for instance, the teacher does not talk to other professionals for them anymore. They don't send the emails. They don't call the parent for the child or the student. They are not going to communicate for the student. You're going to coach and assist the student to communicate for themselves. Help the child email their teacher. Help the child to call their parent about something y'all talked about. We're going to have an example later where a child wants to join a soccer team. So help them to talk to the parent, how to talk to the parent. The teacher is going to be in a role where they are going to let that child communicate. So that means that you have to maybe practice those communication skills. And, you know, that's our goal in the ESOL world, right? We're supposed to be helping our children to gain the language skills to communicate. So you're going to have to help them through role play, help them through different conversations. It's like you're preparing them for the big event. Okay. So when the big event comes, you've got to step back. The child is now the star. The student is the star. So that means you have to be very careful not to take over their spotlight, because sometimes we'll let them start. And if it doesn't go perfectly, we'll want to step in and fix it for them. And that's not your role either. If it doesn't go perfectly, that's kind of a learning experience. So let's say I've practiced them going to talk to their math teacher about how they're having trouble and they need a little more time. And then they go to their math teacher and the math teacher is not overly wonderful about it in the first conversation. That doesn't mean I step in and go talk to the math teacher and fix it. Okay, it may mean that we have to step back and think about, okay, so what did the math teacher say exactly? And have the conversation and try to get them to take that next step for themselves. Okay, so when you're teaching self-advocacy, so you're in that role of the coach and the facilitator again, there are several ways to do it. It can be structured lessons, and I'm going to show those in a few minutes, where you have a unit and you practice through lessons the goal to help them to actually be a self-advocate and give them a project where they have a chance to demonstrate that. Or it can be teachable moments. I love teachable moments as a teacher, but by definition, we never know when they're going to come up. You never know when your student's going to come and say, I'm so upset, or I can't believe this just happened, or I'm angry. And you have those times to go, well, what's going on? Help me to know why you're feeling this way, or, why you're so quiet today. And then you can learn those situations and sometimes help them to advocate and work through them. Another way to teach self-advocacy is, I know a lot of you guys have units in your history or certain months of the year where we're talking about civil rights, and advocacy can be inserted into those curriculums and those units pretty easily. So if you take a second and sit back and think about some of the things you're already doing maybe in the classroom, advocacy, teaching those words and teaching those skills when you're already studying civil rights leaders or different periods in history where somebody was an advocate for what they wanted or what they needed, you can go ahead and insert, your rights as here in this country, that we all can be advocates. And that's what this means, what being an advocate means. All right, so here's some suggested instructional activities. Again, discussion is where it's all going to start. So making sure your students know, the laws that here in the US, we have freedom of speech. We have laws where discrimination is not allowed. We have laws that give us equal rights. We have cultural norms, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a little while, where we are in an individualistic culture here in the United States, which means you're expected to speak up for the things you want or for the things that you have a right to have. School expectations. You may go to other countries and you're not supposed to ask the teacher for help or say out loud that, you need something different than what they're doing for the rest of the class. But here in our setting, students are allowed to do that and are encouraged to do those things. And then finally, we have some emergent adult roles that have some expectations. So, there's accommodations that they're allowed to have, not just, at school, but also, in their workplace one day, and that you need to speak up for those things. Another activity is to role play. And so when you are role playing, there are different, depending on what level you teach, there are different role plays. So when you're in elementary school, think about friendships and trying new things and how your students could have some scenarios to advocate for themselves. When you're in middle school, I know bullying, some of those SEL things, I know your social emotional learning that are big now. You may already have some kind of unit like that where you're having to talk about drugs or gangs or, just simple things like getting assistance with your work, like I already said. So you could use any of those scenarios. In high school, sometimes students want AP work, maybe in a class that they're good at, or some other accommodation that they're not getting. Maybe practice those scenarios with your students. In college, you may need to advocate for cultural differences from one country to another or one classroom to another and how to address that. Partner activities. Have them practice with partners. I know we always like to, have them talk just to us, but spend some time where you talk through a bad example and a good example, and you contrast the two with their partners. Lots of projects are great for advocacy. I'm going to tell you about one where I've already, alluded to it, where we lead our meetings here at our high school at Gadsden City. But there are other projects. They could identify something in their school or their community that they want to advocate for and change. And that could be an awesome classroom project where y'all look to change something that you feel like needs to be changed or altered in your school. In number 5, information for individual students is a big part of advocacy. So be prepared to share their test scores with them. Talk to them about their language goals. Help them to work to the point to where they remember in the framework it had knowledge of self, to where they have that self-knowledge, so they're prepared to use that to advocate for themselves. So if I have the self-knowledge of where my scores are from the last time I took my ASOL test, and then I can use that knowledge when I'm talking to my teacher, that, hey, you know, I'm really working on this goal. It's in my plan. And I know that one of the strategies to help me with this goal is that I can get extra time, have your lectures recorded, or they know what it is, so that way they can talk to the teacher specifically about their own needs. And I think that's a big part of preparing students to be a self-advocate as well.
Great. So one thing that we need to remember when we're doing this is that the self-advocacy and self-determination originated within individualistic cultures. Sandra, a few minutes ago, dropped a comment into the chat box that hit on this exactly, right? If home cultures are mostly collectivist, familial expectations for appropriate behavior in school may confuse MLs or cause stress, because principles of self-advocacy contradict their background knowledge, and the home culture's expectations. So teaching self-advocacy in multicultural settings involves negotiating the differences between individualistic and collectivistic value systems. Before teaching self-advocacy, inform yourself about your ML's cultures. So here's a spectrum from collectivism to individualism. And a lot of times we like to think of things in very binary terms. That's also part of our individualistic culture, is putting things as black or white, but that's really not what it is. It's really a spectrum. Excuse me. And all families aren't going to be all the way collectivistic or all the way individualistic. One of the things that I used to do when I was teaching multilingual learners at the college level is we would talk about, it was a cross-cultural communication course. So we would talk about collectivism versus individualism, and we would talk about some of the traits of those, like, is the extended family very nurturing and protecting? Does each individual in the family really look to the family unit to see how their decisions are going to impact that group? Or do they tend to be more loosely connected with the individual members doing whatever it is that they wish to do, and really just focusing on the nuclear family? And so we would draw a line. I would draw a long line on the blackboard, and I would have my students that came from all over, Asian, Middle East, they were from everywhere, and they would plot themselves on the spectrum. And it was always interesting to me to see that even sometimes students that came from the same country, or in some cases even the same city, would plot themselves differently, right? So we really have to get to know our individual students. It's not going to be the same for all cultures.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of flip back and go through the lessons that I've used with my students. And I want you to understand that this is just a broad framework. But I do think that we kept it broad on here because no matter what grade level you're in, you know, you can teach stories of leaders all the way from kindergarten with little picture books, all the way up through high school, where you're given more details and things along with them, and even showing movies. So the very first step I always try to do is try to inspire them. I already gave you some of the questions that I kind of asked, but we also look at famous leaders along with that. So when I say famous leaders, it's people you already talk about, people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Cesar Chavez that are in our history books and are part of our history, either here in the US or other countries. And I would encourage you to try to find a leader that is from your students' culture. So that may take some research on your own. If you have students, you know, that are from India, let's find a leader there. Okay. So when you find your leader, you want the students to kind of react and have a buy-in with this leader of, wow, they stood up for their rights. They saw something that wasn't okay going on and they spoke up about it. And then after you get them that hook and you point out this leader is being an advocate, so let's take an easy one. If we go with Martin Luther King Jr., when he had people doing sit-ins or boycotting the bus, or when he was writing letters to people, he was being an advocate. And he was training the people with him to self-advocate for themselves. So that's kind of going back to us as teachers as well, right? So kind of, think about that. So you're going to inspire them by showing videos or movies or telling stories about famous leaders. Along with that, I would talk about myself, a time that I had to advocate for myself, okay? Not just for another person, because then you're advocating for, but a time when you had to advocate for yourself. So I would put both of those stories together to show how it's important, not just for the people in the storybooks, because yes, that's important, but also for just a regular everyday person in their own lives, okay? So after we kind of introduce that, okay, I want to then teach them the laws and make sure that they understand the laws, because sometimes they may just think it's, excuse me for saying this, but white teacher Miss Day who does that. It's not like all Americans and everyone in this country. And so I want them to understand that from being here in the United States, we have laws that give them the right to speak, the right for things to be fair, that we cannot discriminate in this country. And so I want them to see that, it's everybody who can be an advocate, okay? So I do pre-teach vocabulary, and I talked a little bit about that before, but I want them to have the correct vocabulary for when they do try to advocate. I want them to be able to back up what they're saying with evidence, and I want them to feel confident when they do it. So I do preload all the vocabulary that I can. I like to use pictures. I know y'all probably do that too, but we spend some time preloading the vocabulary next. I also have used a cause and effect graphic organizer. So if you think about, okay, we're going to look at civil rights, we're going to think about before, what was it like? Okay, we're going to watch the video. Okay, what was it like after? Okay, now think about for yourself. What is the situation like now? Okay, before. What do you want the situation to look like after? Okay, so some of those still skills that we do a lot in school to support our learners, I want you to think that, okay, we can use those things as well. All right, if time allows, I try to be more specific, especially with older students, and explain to them that a lot of the other laws and court cases that we have now started with the civil rights. So it started with civil rights based on color primarily, but then from that, other laws came. That's how we got things like Lau versus Nichols and Castellano versus Pickard and the Americans Disability Act. So it started maybe with more of a race color thing, but it went on to being a language thing, a disability thing, an educational thing. And they have all of those rights as well. Okay. All right, so now on to lesson 3. This is when we start practicing the difficult conversations. So I usually start with a pre-written little script where I put them in a pair. And so again, based on your age level, you can kind of do that script for whatever you see kind of situations happening around your school or in your community that's appropriate for your age level. So whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, or even college. Then we talk about what's the best way to advocate for that situation. And the discussion needs to include the best mode for advocating, because sometimes it's spoken, but not always, right? Is it an email? Is it a letter? Is it, some other way, a sign that you can make? I'm not sure. All right, it might be something you post in the hallways of your school. Who knows? What's the best way to speak up against that? All right, then the discussion you need to think about what's the best place or time to advocate. And so, when somebody's real busy, that's not a good time sometimes to have a hard conversation. And you kind of just talk about that we want to think through not just the best way always to communicate, but also the best time. All right, the step 3 is when we are going to put ourselves in pairs or in groups, and we're going to practice, because we know conversation skills only really develop if you practice speaking. And so we want to make sure that we give them that chance to sit with a partner where it's not high, high intense situation where they're stressed and that it's difficult and they feel a lot of pressure. Instead, we want to give them a partner and do it where, okay, everybody's in partners in the room. So, just talk with your partner, y'all talk through this, kind of thing. All right. And then let them act out in front of the class. And you can have as much fun with that as you want. You can make it super serious, or you can kind of cut up some as you do it. And I know, again, that takes a lot of pressure off sometimes, and it really helps them. But while they're doing these things, you should be really helping to guide them. So maybe helping them to think critically about their communication skills. What would you not want to say? What if you said it this way versus this other way? Talk about inflection of voice, and just kind of help them play with the situation of, oh, well, you said that. You were really just kind of soft and smooth as you said that. Did you really mean it? And just kind of help them to realize that, their intonation and the way they say things matter, and it can come across different ways. So I know those are language skills, but I think they build perfectly into self-advocacy lessons. All right, so final projects. And again, this is the one I used in my classroom. I've used it multiple times. Like I said, it wouldn't have to be this project. If you've identified a need in your school, you might make it a little bit different. But I have found for especially building self-advocacy skills in an individual, that this one is just one of my best and one of my favorite things to do with my class. So I do give my students their scores. I want them to know, we take the ACT here as well as the Access, and I want them to know what their scores are. Okay, I hope I didn't lose everybody. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want them to think about, okay, here are my scores. What are the things that really help me? And I try not to let them use the gigantic list. And what I mean by that is, y'all know how, especially with our computer programs and things, there is a list of 50 accommodations that they use, which is great. But I want them to look at that list and which of these really help you the most, because these are the ones I want you to be able to talk about in your meeting and talk about to your teachers and let them know that you really need. And so they look at that list of accommodations and kind of pick out their best. All right, we talk about the meeting process, why it's important to, not just be a knot on the log, but again, it's their goals and it's their future, and we want them to improve their language skills. And so kind of just, again, getting them to have that buy-in, and that it's so important that they are active participants. So then what they do is they make a little presentation, usually Google Slides or PowerPoint, and it's not very long. It's 4 or 5 slides. The first slide is all about themselves. So their languages, their culture, where all they've lived, how many brothers and sisters they have, what kind of music, what kind of sports, just a little slide all about me, just getting to know me. And then the second slide is things I'm proud of from this year. So what have they learned that they're happy about, or what awards have they gotten, or what goals have they achieved, or what ways has their language gotten better? And so sometimes you can compare scores from one year to the next and really let them find some things to help them to be proud of themselves for. All right. Then the next is, okay, areas that I need help, and then after that, what accommodations do I feel like I need to get help? Okay, so back to that list again. And then finally help them figure out, all right, so now what are my goals for next year? So the difference again is the focus is on the student. It's not the teacher saying, okay, well, you made this on your test, and this is where we're going to go next year, and here's your goals, and here's your list of accommodations. Here, take this paperwork home to your mom. And so that's a big shift of them kind of taking control and taking responsibility and taking ownership and feeling like they're part of the process. So the last thing we do is we sit in a big circle, just like the picture. And sometimes I'll invite some of the other teachers who just want to sit in and listen, and they'll each show, you know, just their little PowerPoint. We have, they all have Chromebooks here, and they'll pull it up and they'll go through it, and we'll ask questions and we'll talk to them about it. And then it's pretty laid back and it moves on to the next person. But I've had a ton of success with them practicing in our group here, and then them going into situations in the classroom or in their actual meetings with their parents and with other teachers, and being a lot more outspoken and a big part of their own meetings.
Okay, so now that you've heard the theory, now we're going to put it to practice. So we're going to give you a scenario, and you're going to think about the different components for the lessons that Emily spoke about. So think about, would you address this with a discussion, with a role play, with partner activities, with projects? What would you do? So when I switch to the next slide, you're going to see a scenario. I'm going to let you read it for yourself. And then I'd like for you to type into the chat box a short response, what you would do, and maybe just a sentence that explains why or gives a little bit more detail about it. Are you ready? Yeah, it's a tough one, so take a minute to think about it too. Okay, I see discussion and role play, persuasive writing and speaking strategies and sentence frames. Yes. Discussion and role play with her outlining the pros of her interest. Yeah, great. Think about why she loves soccer and how she can describe that to her dad. Yes, nice.
Talk with her about how she can do things that girls and boys do equally.
Oh, yes. Yeah, all of these would be great ways to begin this lesson. Usually what I find is that these types of lessons come up when there's a situation, right? All of a sudden something comes up, like your sixth grader coming in and explaining this. A lot of times self-advocacy is not something that you've planned in advance to do. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Bend It Like Beckham, but if I had time with my students, I might start with showing that movie and talking about Bend It Like Beckham, which is exactly that story. It's a teenage girl who loves to play soccer, and her parents have a fit. They're Indian and they have a fit. when they find out that she's been playing soccer. She's been playing soccer and with boys to make it even worse. And so it tells that story, and that might be a good way to introduce the topic. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide, the takeaways. So today we talked about what is self-advocacy? Why is it important for ESOL teachers? Why is cultural responsiveness important? Ideas for teaching self-advocacy. What are some of your own takeaways? You can even open up the mic if you want to talk. I see Esther posted for 9 years. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. For 9 years all through college. Esther, would you like to open your mic and talk about that?
Yes, my culture, I'm from Haiti. And so in my culture, girls didn't do things like that. And so when I came here, I was about 4 years old, and I tried out for the team in 6th grade or 7th grade, my first year middle school. And my parents went crazy because we were a Christian family who doesn't wear shorts or pants or anything. And girls just don't play soccer, you know? And so it was a big discussion, and I sold them because I was one of those kids who really was pushing to go to college, like really fighting, because I would have been the first one in my family. And so I sold them. I told them they'll give me a scholarship to college. I didn't get a full ride, but I got a little bit to go to college, and I got to play for 9 years from 7th grade all the way through.
Wow, what a great self-advocacy story. That's a great, great story. Now, you were able to handle that with your family, but if you were that same little girl today and you didn't have that skill, like how would we best have been able to help you? How would your teacher have been best able to help you?
Probably giving me the outlet to do the role play, because we were always afraid to speak to our parents because there was no communication. So teaching me how to communicate, how to approach my parents with a level mindedness and with no fear, you know, or maybe I would have fear, but if I practice it enough at school, by the time I got home, I would have had a little bit of foundation on how I wanted to approach, maybe even writing down what I think I want to say, how I want to say it, when I want to say it. Do I want to say it at dinner time or when they just come home from work? No, not just come home from work because they're tired and they're not going to listen. So the timing is important as well.
Yes, excellent points. Esther, thank you so much for sharing. That was like really brought it to life. I appreciate that. I see that we have lots of really great responses in the chat box, and I also see that we're running out of time. But I'm going to read Fayaz. I hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. He posted in the chat box, and I want to read it. I know that I'm pretty sure that he's joining us from Saudi Arabia. So let's see what he has to say. He said, I find a lot of idea being discussed here relatable to what I did last term. I was teaching argumentative essay at B2 level, native Arabic speaking learners of English in Saudi Arabia. My students wrote about, is divorce the end of happy life? Does Netflix reflect my culture? Yeah, these are really, really great questions. Fayaz, would you like to take the mic and talk with us more about this?
Hello, thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Fayaz Malik. I'm teaching here in Riyadh. Now it's been a decade here. So, like last time I was teaching this argumentative essay writing, 5 paragraphs at B2 level, and it was all female class. And it was a nice experience. I tried. I actually changed my rubric that I used to they used to apply previously. So what I did, I just focused on the ideas, like idea generation. And then I gave a kind of freedom to students to choose their topics, whatever they wanted to write about. It took some time, but they came up with a list of topics which they wanted to write about. And they came up with these some of these like really wonderful, inquisitive ideas.
And I love that you let them come out with your topic. So I know I told you the project before, to where they identify something in their community, in their school, in their lives that needs to be advocated for. And that is central just to what's happening, especially to them. So as a teacher, you may not have near as great of ideas as what they can tell you about. And so I think that that's important, that we give our students chances to, speak for, this is where I need to advocate, not just always a predetermined scenario or situation.
Yeah, thank you.
I love that as well. And I love the fact that, the writing is also such a safe space. I just love that. And, you never know where students are going to go. And once they put those ideas down in writing and worked through them, you never know that's just going to be powerful. What a rich discussion, you guys. What an incredible presentation, and what rich discussion in the chat and also here at the end. I'm so thrilled.
Thank you so much for having us. We're honored to have been invited to come.
Thank you.
Well, I know our moderator is going to take back over for a second, but I did want to just take a point of privilege as current Georgia TESOL president for just a second, if I may, Dr. Hibbs, and just say that this series on student, family, and community empowerment is going to continue. And a mention was made of sharing student scores, and that's the next session up, and it is public. It is open to anyone who's a member or not a member of Georgia TESOL. Anyone can join. It's on the 27th. And it won't just be US specific, I don't think, it will be situated in the US specifically in terms of talking about how we could share student scores here and talk to them about goal setting, but I think it could be applied across contexts. So join us. We would love to have you join us for that. Somebody else was already going to say it, but I just got so excited I had to say it too. And then I'll also point out that if you do live in Georgia or close to Georgia, like some of our Alabama friends, you guys can cross over the border, and we are going to have our Georgia TESOL social in person. It is going to probably change, and this is literally 5 minutes before we started this, hot off the press, because our conference chair mentioned that he wanted to do a session on conference proposal writing on May 4th. So we're getting bumped back to May 18th, it looks like. But look on the website and pay attention for that announcement, because I think that Landa Robinson, who is one of the PL series on this moderator, I think she and Karen Terrell are working on that right now. Now, I am going to hush up and quit talking about stuff, but I'm just thrilled with this incredible quality of this. Oh, and if you didn't see it earlier, I will take one more. I will go and I will put the link in the chat to their article in the Georgia TESOL Journal. Click on the link. The Georgia TESOL Journal is free of charge to anyone. It's a peer-reviewed online journal. And the article that came out of the original work that was published in the Georgia TESOL Journal is linked there. Please download it and read it so that you can have an even fuller and richer understanding of this. Back to the moderators.
Okay, so thank you very much for the very, very informative and very thought-provoking presentation. So thank you three for joining us. So as Dr. Webb mentioned, so in 2 weeks, on April 27th, at the same time, 5:30, 6:30, will be our next session in our Georgia TESOL Professional Learning Series, which will be a panel discussion on sharing access scores with students and families, which is actually a really nice tie-in to the presentation we had today. So thank you all very much for attending, and hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Brian. You did a great job moderating.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all. You guys are all doing